Israel's enhanced military capabilities throughout 2024 made Iranian nuclear facilities more vulnerable than they had ever been since the program began. Israeli demonstrations of precision strike capabilities against Iranian assets in Syria and elsewhere convinced Tehran that Israeli threats against Iranian nuclear facilities were credible rather than rhetorical. Advanced Israeli bunker-busting capabilities, enhanced intelligence penetration of Iranian facilities, and improved delivery systems made successful Israeli strikes against Iranian nuclear infrastructure increasingly likely rather than theoretically possible. Intelligence sharing between Israel and Western partners throughout 2024 exposed Iranian nuclear activities to unprecedented international scrutiny. Detailed intelligence about Iranian nuclear facility operations, personnel movements, and technical achievements reached European and American decision-makers with accuracy that eliminated Iranian ability to conceal sensitive activities. Behind-the-scenes intelligence sharing revealed Iranian nuclear activities that IAEA inspectors had been unable to detect through official monitoring procedures. Western intelligence agencies documented undeclared Iranian nuclear activities at facilities that had not been subject to international inspection. The nuclear program became a liability that isolated Iran rather than an asset that provided protection or leverage in international negotiations. Every technical achievement that Iranian scientists celebrated became another justification for international sanctions, military threats, and diplomatic isolation. The program that was supposed to deter Iranian enemies instead motivated them to coordinate responses that Iran couldn't counter through conventional diplomatic or military means. The massive costs of nuclear program development diverted resources from maintaining proxy relationships that had provided Iran with alternative sources of regional influence and security. Iran spent billions on nuclear development throughout 2024, while cutting proxy support dramatically during the same period. The financial trade-off became clear. Iran chose nuclear development over proxy network maintenance, weakening its regional influence while advancing nuclear capabilities that increased rather than decreased its international isolation. Iranian leadership began recognizing by late 2024 that nuclear advancement had become counterproductive to Iranian security interests rather than essential for Iranian survival. The program that was supposed to represent Iran's ultimate strategic weapon had become its greatest strategic weakness, motivating international cooperation against Iran while providing no meaningful protection against the threats that Iranian nuclear development had created. Iran's nuclear program miscalculation represents the most expensive strategic error in the Islamic Republic's history. What Iran's isolation really means. The scale of this strategic collapse reveals what Iran's isolation actually means for Middle Eastern power dynamics and the Islamic Republic's survival prospects. Iran's strategic position in 2025 represents a complete reversal from its regional peak in 2019 to 2020, when Tehran appeared to dominate Middle Eastern geopolitics through an extensive network of proxy relationships and great power partnerships. The transformation has been so dramatic that intelligence analysts struggle to find historical precedents for such rapid strategic decline by a major regional power. In 2019, Iran's proxy network controlled significant territory across 4 countries, maintained regular coordination through established command structures, and received consistent funding that exceeded $2 billion annually. Iranian influence extended from Gaza's Mediterranean coastline to Yemen's Red Sea ports, creating a strategic arc that threatened Israeli security and constrained American military options throughout the region. The metrics of Iranian decline across every major relationship tell a story of systematic strategic failure that goes far beyond temporary setbacks or tactical miscalculations. Proxy funding has sharply declined due to sanctions and regional strains, representing a massive reduction in the financial foundation of Iranian regional influence. Diplomatic engagement has similarly collapsed, with high-level meetings between Iranian officials and proxy leadership falling from monthly coordination sessions to complete communication blackouts lasting over 6 months. Intelligence sharing arrangements that once provided Iran with real-time regional awareness have been terminated by proxy groups that now view Iranian intelligence requests as security risks rather than mutual cooperation. Great power relationships that provided Iran with international protection and economic alternatives have deteriorated even more dramatically than proxy connections. Russia-Iran trade peaked at $18 billion in 2022, but fell to less than $6 billion by late 2024 as Moscow redirected resources toward its European conflict priorities. China-Iran commercial relationships similarly declined from $85 billion annually to approximately $45 billion, as Beijing calculated that supporting Iran complicated more valuable partnerships with Gulf Arab states. The 8-month gap in substantive diplomatic contact between Iranian leadership and both Russian and Chinese officials represents the longest period of great power isolation that Iran has experienced since the 1979 revolution. Iran's domestic political stability faces unprecedented pressure as the regime struggles to maintain legitimacy without the external successes that had previously justified domestic sacrifices and international isolation. The Iranian economy contracted by 12% throughout 2024, while inflation surged above 40%, creating conditions that historically have triggered major political upheavals in authoritarian systems. Iranian citizens who had accepted economic hardship as the price of regional influence and revolutionary ideology began questioning whether continued confrontation with the international community served Iranian national interests. Protest movements that had been suppressed through appeals to external threats and revolutionary solidarity gained momentum as those external justifications lost credibility. The regime's traditional method of maintaining domestic support through external confrontation and regional influence has become counterproductive as Iranian regional activities now trigger international responses that worsen rather than improve Iranian domestic conditions. Iranian proxy operations that once demonstrated state power and ideological commitment now serve as justifications for enhanced international sanctions that directly harm ordinary Iranian citizens. The nuclear program that was supposed to provide ultimate security guarantees has instead motivated international coordination that threatens regime survival more directly than any external military threat Iran had previously faced. The long-term implications of losing both proxy networks and great power backing simultaneously create strategic vulnerabilities that Iran cannot address through conventional diplomatic or military responses. Iranian regional influence had depended on the combination of proxy capabilities and great power protection that made direct confrontation with Iran prohibitively expensive for regional rivals. Without proxy deterrence or great power backing, Iran faces potential isolation that could culminate in regime change efforts that Tehran would be unable to counter through traditional resistance strategies. Regional powers now make decisions about Middle Eastern security architecture without considering Iranian interests or capabilities in their strategic calculations. Saudi Arabia's normalization discussions with Israel proceed without Iranian input or concern about Iranian retaliation. Gulf Arab states coordinate security arrangements that explicitly exclude Iranian participation while addressing threats that Iranian proxy network once posed. Even traditional Iranian allies like Syria have begun hedging their relationships with Tehran as Iranian support becomes more liability than asset in regional political dynamics. The economic vulnerabilities that Iranian isolation has exposed threaten the material foundations of regime survival in ways that ideological appeals cannot address indefinitely. Iran's inability to access international banking systems, technology markets, and energy partnerships has created economic constraints that limit the regime's ability to provide basic services to Iranian citizens. The brain drain accelerating throughout 2024 and 2025 has removed technical expertise that Iran requires for economic development and military capabilities maintenance. Iranian oil exports, constrained by international sanctions and reduced by regional instability, provide insufficient revenue to fund both domestic requirements and external commitments. Military vulnerabilities have become equally apparent as Iranian conventional forces demonstrate capabilities that lag increasingly behind regional rivals who have enhanced their defense partnerships with advanced military powers. Iranian air defense systems proved inadequate against Israeli precision strikes throughout 2024, revealing technical deficiencies that Iranian domestic production cannot address without international cooperation that remains unavailable. Iranian naval capabilities in the Persian Gulf face coalition opposition that overwhelms Iranian defensive systems while threatening Iranian energy export infrastructure that provides the regime's primary revenue source. Iran's revolutionary ideology has transformed from a regional asset that attracted allies and legitimized resistance activities into a liability that complicates diplomatic engagement and economic partnerships. The ideological framework that once provided Iran with soft power influence across Shia populations and anti-Western movements now serves as justification for international isolation and regional opposition. Iranian appeals to revolutionary solidarity ring hollow when Iranian support consists of ideology rather than material assistance that addresses practical problems facing potential allies. The realization that Iran's decades-long strategy has not just failed but actively backfired represents the most devastating conclusion for Iranian strategic planning since the revolution began. Every major Iranian initiative designed to enhance security and regional influence has produced outcomes that increased rather than decreased Iranian vulnerabilities. The proxy network weakened Iranian security by motivating international coordination against Tehran. The nuclear program accelerated rather than deterred international pressure. Great power partnerships collapsed when Iran most needed external support. Regional influence declined as Iranian activities pushed Arab states toward cooperation with Iranian enemies. This comprehensive strategic collapse creates implications that extend far beyond Iranian borders, potentially reshaping regional power dynamics while raising fundamental questions about whether the Islamic Republic's revolutionary approach can survive in the modern Middle East. The numbers tell the complete story of strategic failure on an unprecedented scale. Iran's isolation in 2025 represents the total collapse of a 45-year regional strategy that began with the 1979 revolution. The proxy network that was supposed to guarantee Iranian security has abandoned Tehran when it needed support most. Great power partnerships that provided international protection have evaporated. The nuclear program that promised ultimate deterrence has instead accelerated Iranian isolation. Every major Iranian strategic initiative has backfired spectacularly, creating the exact opposite outcomes that Tehran intended. Iran's revolutionary model has become fundamentally incompatible with current Middle Eastern dynamics, where economic cooperation trumps ideological confrontation.